Everyone, and welcome to the final webinar for Southwest Sydney LHD's Safe Haven or Safe Space service. I'm Carrie, I'm one of Rose's in the Ocean facilitators, and this is Bridget. Bridget.
Hi everyone, it's Bridget here. You probably know my name or my face possibly. Nice to see you.
Thanks. We'll just get going. Thanks, Bridget. Thanks. Just like to begin with some acknowledgements. So we'd like to acknowledge and pay our respects to the original occupants and traditional custodians of all the lands that we're meeting on. We know when we do these things virtually, it can be many, many lands, but this Safe Haven will be on Darug and Dharawal country. So we're paying our respects to those people and to the elders past and present, and also to those emerging voices that are so important. We'd also like to just acknowledge the leadership that First Nations people show in terms of thinking about these sort of holistic ways to be with people in emotional pain and to reduce distress in a holistic way. Thanks, Bridget. So the process so far, just a quick recap, we've now had in this LHD, we've had the lived experience focus group conversations where we brought small groups of people with lived experience in the local region to talk to us about what their current experiences are, what it feels like to be supported in ED when you're experiencing a suicidal crisis or supporting someone to do so, and what are some of the needs that aren't currently being met by that conventional system. Also spoke to health professionals about what it's like to walk a day in their shoes, trying to do that, trying to provide great support to people. We then brought people with lived experience together in a combined sort of group session that was face-to-face. We then fed that those outputs back into the health professionals as a whole group. We talked to them, firmed up some of the elements of the safe space, the local safe spaces a bit further. We had that feedback loop one, which was followed up with a survey. So we had the webinar and then the survey, and then we came back last week to do a combined session. We brought people with lived experience together with health professionals that have been participating directly in this co-design process. We had a final session in Liverpool, and we're now here to present you with some outputs from that session and also from the feedback loop. So we'll communicate that to you, and it's also about encouraging people to spread the word about the survey that will be available after this webinar, so we can gather any final suggestions, thoughts, insights that could inform the service model that then will be developed and delivered to the LHD. Thanks, Bridget. In the context of co-design of suicide prevention services, we also like to acknowledge people with lived experience. Roses in the Ocean is a lived experience organisation. And we particularly just want to acknowledge all of the uniquely valuable lives that have been lost to suicide, which is why we're all coming together to create these new services, and also just to acknowledge the uniquely valuable form of expertise that lived experience is and the value it brings to these co-design processes. Thanks, Bridget. Okay, I'm not going to labour through every detail of these findings. What I'd encourage you to do, this is a recorded webinar, take your time to pause, dig into the detail if you're interested, but I'll just give you a high level summary and perhaps animate it with a couple of quotes, what we have heard from the people that responded from a lived experience perspective. We had 6 people respond to the survey, health professionals, it was 8. Thanks, Bridget. So in terms of the lived experience perspectives, the respondents generally agree that the experiences of accessing ED and the needs of someone accessing ED that were identified in those focus group conversations we had were accurate. It did reflect their own experiences, or it was an accurate recording of those experiences by people that have participated in the co-design process. Here's a couple of quotes for you. So I have not accessed This LHD's ED, but in the 3 other EDs, I have had very similar experiences to many of these comments. Very concerning that now that this person knows that the local ED has similar issues. And then someone has said here that they had a positive experience with nurses, so they wanted that to be known, but they found it very distressing that teams of doctors would do their rounds, stand at my bed, discuss details of my suicide attempt and my treatment without acknowledging that I was there, without introducing themselves. It made me feel invisible and worthless. So that certainly squares with the stuff that came out from the co-design participants' direct experiences when we talk to people with lived experience through that process. Thanks, Bridget. Then lived experience, from a lived experience perspective, people also agreed with the draft values of the safe haven, that they resonated with them, and there was some additional suggestions for both values and principles. And Bridget will take you through a consolidated list of the core values that have been identified for this process that the co-design participants believe are important to for the safe space to hold itself to. So a couple of quotes here. The draft values resonate with this person, particularly non-judgmental, compassion, respect, open-mindedness, and empathy. And someone else says, I believe that all these values are important because going forward, it'll produce better care for our clients, especially empathy, because it shows that we hear them and understand how they feel. And then someone has talked about the value of lived experience here. Having lived experience is important because you have that level of understanding of what it's like to be in that mindset and all the emotions that come along with it. Thanks, Bridget. And then in terms of the lived experience response to the elements of the service model that had been captured so far through the direct co-design workshops, there was a broad agreement with those elements, but there was also further suggestions made around the following points. So involvement of clinicians, so that has emerged as an issue, and we'll be talking a little bit about that later. You'll see that when we work through scenarios, which we're going to provide you with a summary of how that was undertaken last week in the workshop, that some of these issues were sort of surfaced and further explored. So involvement of clinicians, knowledge and training of staff, it needs to be inclusive of young people, community referrals and promotion needs to be thought through, information for ED and other clinical staff, so that's a consideration, that support groups could be something to be considered within the space, connection to drug and alcohol support, so that was a theme that emerged locally as being a priority. The issue of transport to the safe haven, if there's any kind of capability for there being transport. Extended hours in all of the co-design processes we've done so far. The ideal model is of a 24/7 safe haven, but certainly while that's not possible at this point, it's important to be able to feed back to the LHD that this is something that we're hearing locally is important. A mixed layout, so I believe that refers to the idea that the actual physical space within the safe haven should have a mixture of sort of private room or area and then a place where people can kind of congregate together. And then a diversity and acceptance flag sign, so indications that this space is going to be culturally safe, and also information in different languages. So as I said to you, that there is an issue that has emerged here is the idea that there should be some form of clinical involvement. So there were strongly divergent views. Some people held very strongly the view that this is a non-clinical service and clinical services shouldn't be provided, and that's in line with the Ministry of Health requirements. However, there are other people that told us that, for example, clinical services are important, especially if the client is at high risk. Having them connected and in play with us would be beneficial just in case of a high-risk situation that needs immediate response and care. Now, while we don't have full context there, we can assume probably when someone says in play with us that that person's talking about the system, the clinical system. Someone else said there is a need for staff to understand all aspects that could lead a person to have suicidal distress, to understand without judgment and guide people to appropriate care. just to highlight this idea that there were some conflicting views from people with lived experience around the desire for a clinical element to the service versus it being very important that there was no clinical involvement, that is something that probably needs to continue to be explored. And the point of a co-design process is not always to get complete agreement, but rather to make sure that everyone is heard and to as thoroughly explore these divergent issues where it's possible. Thanks, Bridget. And then just some further perspectives here from people with lived experience. Someone has said staff need to access to specialists to make decisions on medical care and safety of people. The responsibility is too high. I personally would not work as a peer worker at this centre if I had to make those decisions without support. So again, that speaks to the idea of really people needing to be able to understand the role of the SP peer workers, and people wanting a sort of a high degree of comfort around what support those peer workers will have, what is the ongoing professional development of those workers so that they can be effective and sustainable, that workforce can be effective and sustainable. I think there was also, if you could just go to the next slide, thanks, Bridget. There was also, and I'm not sure if it was contained there, but just to let you know, there was also in the lived experience responses, there were divergent views around the issue of security. That did also come up in the health professional responses as well. And just to acknowledge here that it's the idea of security is also in conflict with other input that we've heard quite strongly from people with lived experience, that they would not feel safe accessing a service that has security guards present. And also the issue was raised around how that will sit in tension with the ministry's requirement that it takes a trauma-informed approach to care and support. So in terms of the health professionals' perspectives, they agreed that the experiences that were captured in the co-design process in supporting someone in ED reflected their experiences. And then I'll just give you a couple of quotes here. A service for people in suicidal crisis that does not involve a heavy-handed approach, e.g. with security guards, is important. So that was an identification of what needs aren't currently being met and what the safe haven might feel in terms of a service gap. There's a general attitude in ED that people who are suicidal are choosing to be that way and are wasting everyone's time and resources. So we have heard that quite clearly, both from people with lived experience, but also interestingly from health professionals as well. And suggestion here that what's needed is staff that represent the diversity of the community. People are more likely to use a service they feel a connection to. And then in terms of the approach to care and support, staff being able to be very calm, very grounded, speak very gently and slowly, and meet the communication needs of the patient. Thanks, Bridget. And then just some suggestions here that were made in addition to what was generated through our conversations with health professionals directly. So involvement of clinicians in clinical services. Again, as I was saying, that has come up, but also there has been strongly divergent opinion around that. So it's important to note. Also, a recognition of the role of carers, family and friends. We heard that both from health professionals and people with lived experience, that is an important consideration. Holistic and human contact. Someone's suggestion here for pastoral care or just a recognition of spiritual needs. Staff training, supervision and support. Avoiding a police profile. I'm assuming that I don't have context here, is just about that idea again about the presence of first responders and security can be a traumatizing experience and also a barrier to access for some people. Community promotion, so that needs to be considered. How is this going to be promoted in the community? Integration with other LHD teams. Hours availability again, information in various languages again, education and information for guests and carers, and also again the idea that staff from diverse backgrounds and with gender diversity and cultural diversity has been raised a number of times in this local community as well as being important. And then just to show you the distinction, this difference playing out, divergence around clinical versus non-clinical. Someone saying, I disagree with clinical services playing an important part. This safe haven should be a holistic approach. Someone else saying there can be a clinical side to suicidal challenges as well as psychosocial. If clinical services are not provided, how would peer support staff support a patient with this? I see this as a supportive and safety measure for patients. And then someone else saying, no clinicians need to stay with the initial non-clinical nature of the service. A consultation pathway is a better suggestion. Thanks, Bridget. And then just a couple more quotes here for you. Important for all staff, ED and Safe Haven, to be working as a team. And here there is such a huge fear systemically around risk with suicidality and the implications from a legal perspective. It needs to be clearer what this means for organisations and workers. So issues around governance are ones that haven't been neatly resolved, and they're ones for ongoing consideration and consultation. Thanks, Bridget. So as I said before, last week we spent most of the time, like the meaty part of our discussion, with local co-design participants. We're about workshopping scenarios. We like to do that as a way of kind of surfacing some of these points of divergence. It's a way to further explore things that might have come up previously but haven't really been worked through. In particular, it's a way of getting people to start thinking about how does the safe space attend to sometimes what look like quite difficult and sort of ethical dilemmas potentially, and do so in a way that aligns with the ministry requirements and that also holds to the values that we've heard are so important to people in this sort of non-clinical, holistic, peer-based service. Thanks, Bridget. So Bridget and I'll take you through the first two, and then Bridget will take you through 3 and 4. So just to read this out to you, but you can go back, you can pause and have a look at this in more detail. Leanne walks into the safe space. She knows the safe space well, having visited for a few weeks in a row. She had previously told her SP peer worker it's a place where she can relax for a while, knowing that she's safe from self-harming while there. Tonight she appears to be intoxicated and is quite agitated that the peer worker who she now feels she can trust isn't available to speak with her. She's becoming quite loud and insistent, and another guest has indicated that it's making them uncomfortable. So thanks, Bridget. So the response to this scenario, there was quite a strong, it was a very rich discussion, and people had quite strong views that were sometimes divergent, particularly around the idea of the limits of a no wrong door approach. So the ministry requires that safe havens take a no wrong door approach. And so that became an area for very robust discussion in the room last week. And you'll see how through some of the responses, how people dealt with that. So it was said that it was unfair to assume that Leanne is intoxicated. So to challenge this assumption, it could well be something else. There needs to be a range of strategies available to help build rapport with Leanne, including allowing Leanne to talk about anything, gentle questioning, breathing activities, going for a walk outside, offering a cup of tea. There needs to be transparent and explain that the staff member that Leanne knew isn't rostered on tonight, and to try and understand Leanne's reasons for her frustration. Leanne needs to be provided with options to move into a different space away from other guests in order to be comfortable. So there was suggestions for somewhere outside can be helpful, or a sensory room, and that the purpose really in how Leanne is responded to is about the need to build trust, comfort and security. And just a simple question of what can I help you with tonight, people thought was a good starting point. Also to understand what's happening for Leanne at that moment, and to collaboratively work on something that can be done to support her. Thanks, Bridget. It was also suggested that a peer worker is to use their own sort of professional judgment around the level of intoxication and whether it's safe to work with Leanne, and whether Leanne is in the best place at that moment in terms of her needs. It was also suggested if a person is intoxicated and needs medical treatment or more specialised care, the safe haven needs to develop a policy around that. This is also therefore where tensions were raised between the idea of an open door approach that's stated in the ministry guidelines and then keeping guests safe. So some of the participants saw this as relating more to the idea, the spirit of an open door policy, I guess, being inclusive and welcoming of people from diverse backgrounds and cultures to feel safe accessing the service, while other people sort of interpreted it more literally as I guess, as a policy, meaning that the service does not have any exclusion criteria and that anyone can attend the safe space, even after having a chat with peer workers and peer workers determining with them that it may not be the safest place for them. And so in this scenario, this sort of related specifically to Leanne's level of intoxication and whether she could be continued to be supported in the safe haven in a way that kept her safe, but also ensured the safety of guests and staff members. There was also someone raised the issue that we need to recognise that similar services have existed historically that have not needed to exclude people from services, that they've been able to work sort of on a case-by-case basis. And there was also a suggestion of having a card or a sign displaying just that actually outlined the shared expectations of the safe haven that you could give to people, and that the physical layout should enable those in the space to invite a guest in after a short conversation. And that's sort of a way of, I guess, ensuring that safety or creating a sort of a safety. Thanks, Bridget. Okay, and then scenario 2. Amanda is a 20-year-old woman with a history of past suicide attempts who comes to the safe space extremely distressed. She says that her life is not worth living, that she has tried everything to stop feeling this way. She tells the peer worker that she has been on dozens of different medications, tried therapy for childhood trauma, done everything the psychologist told her. Nothing ever works, she says, and she's run out of options. When the worker asks if she has plans to kill herself, she says she does and she has the means, that she's waiting for her mum and dad to leave her alone. The history of previous attempts is known to one of the safe space peer workers who had previously supported her in the local ED. Thanks, Bridget. So in terms of responding to this scenario, one of the first things that was really agreed by the group was that there needs to be an acknowledgement that Amanda has done the right thing and is in the right place simply by turning up, to recognise that her distress and that distress generally isn't fixed in sort of time and space, and that could be reduced just through the very experience of being in the space, and particularly what people were saying was the experience of being in a space that was very different to people's typical experiences through ED, that it was important to apply the core values and principles in responding to her about maintaining trust while ensuring safety, sitting with the person, just being with someone in distress, not trying to fix them, as someone said, asking what she wants and finding out why she has turned up. So really asking those curious questions that people recognise as being sort of essential part of peer work. But also that it would be important for a plan that could be made for how to proceed before she leaves or for the safe space closes, but that if there was time to not act immediately, to develop a plan, that it's more important to be building this rapport and trust. That also that there could be practical suggestions made about how to reduce distress, and there could be activities, just talking with someone and doing an activity with someone suggested is something that can be helpful. That it also should be possible for Amanda to be linked with Spot if need be after she's left the space. And also there really was agreement that it's only in the most extreme case and when all else doesn't work that it would be necessary to escalate the situation to connect her with sort of the more conventional clinical crisis support. There was also thinking through, people were talking about in the practical reality of this scenario happening and recognising that this will be not an uncommon scenario in a space that's been identified to provide support for people in suicidal crisis, but there needs to be scope and discretion to open later if necessary. And if it's just a matter, as someone said, if it's just a matter of paying overtime, then that should happen. And to also to take that strength-based approach to Amanda to draw out what are her existing supports, her natural supports, and to work out how to leverage those. And then also there was suggestion around the need for follow-up the next day, even if there had been a good experience, just giving the option of being able for her to leave her number so she can be followed up. Thanks, Bridget. And then just a few more. Was that it for scenario 2?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Carrie. Yeah, thanks. I'll take over the next scenario 3. So on this one, we looked at a young man, Jason. He arrives at the safe space and he is accompanied by a lady of similar age who he doesn't introduce. Jason appears a little agitated with the woman, but seems happy to have arrived at the safe space. He accepts a cup of tea from one of the staff, and while he's chatting quietly with them, he keeps glancing towards the woman. It's discovered she is Jason's sister and is really keen to stay with him in the safe space and is clearly very concerned about her brother. So in the response to this scenario, the group thought about that it would be ideal to have a range of spaces within the safe haven where a family member could possibly go, an area for them to be present and comfortable in. There was recognition that carers are there because they want to help and they also have a need for empathy. There were many suggestions about providing materials such as videos, so there's something to do for the carer to do while they're waiting. And there was a really strong need to keep the carer in the loop with what's going on. We even went a little bit further, talking about if several family members showed up, what would happen in that scenario. And everyone agreed that each person should be treated the same way and offered support by the peer worker. There was agreement that we should ask the person what they want. So this goes for both the carer and for Jason. There was a view that Jason is the priority, so give him the option of talking one-on-one with his sister or with his sister there. There was, again, talk about material, so maybe providing some sort of carers pack that Jason's sister could read through to know a little bit more about how to support Jason. There was discussion around information and how it needs to be kept private, so ask Jason what information he wants his sister to know. Encourage his sister to write down what she wants to know and any concerns that she had. So again, something that she could do while she was being supported. Peer workers to connect Jason with other supports to ensure he feels empowered. So there's a little bit of follow-up support that was discussed there. And again, with the follow-up after 24 hours to check in, and someone suggested after a week as well. And that follow-up could possibly be a personalized letter, handwritten that says thanks for coming, and to show that the peer workers care about Jason. The next scenario 4, this one was about David. So David turns up at the safe space for the first time. He seems quite agitated and distracted. He had heard about the safe space from a community services worker who supports him in a program for people with complex and enduring mental illness. He tells the SP peer worker that his neighbor is trying to control his thoughts through a chip he has planted in his television. David says that he can't handle the torment of this anymore and feels that killing himself is the only way to get relief from it. Okay, so for the responding to this scenario, there was a lot of discussion around keeping David safe by focusing on his suicidal thoughts and emotional pain and not focusing necessarily on his mental health condition. There was suggestion around doing some grounding techniques to support David to focus on what's true for him right now, such as what's happening in his body and how he's physically feeling. It was emphasized that workers could share their own lived experience and strategies that they might have used before if they had similar experiences as David. Active listening for what's happening with David was really important as well. and along with avoid questioning David's beliefs and focus on validating his feelings. Again, there was talk about other things that David could possibly do while he was talking, and that could also involve a comforting environment such as couches or sensory items. So there's other things for him to be involved in. There was a response around asking David where in the space he would like to sit or lie to feel most comfortable, and finding ways that work for David, as he may have ways to keep himself safe. So there was a lot of emphasis around asking him what he needs to do in this scenario if he's been in it before, and find out if there are times where he doesn't have these feelings during the day as well, and see what explore those times as well. There was a good discussion around having no strict time frames for supporting anyone who comes in, and a strong quote there was, as long as it takes to support that person. There was a discussion around the peer worker making the judgment on how they should be approaching and supporting David, and ensure to periodically check in with him. And before David leaves, ensure he's in a safe place where he can go home and make arrangements to stay safe. Kind of in line with this, there was also, I'll go to the next one, concerns raised around collecting David's information. So some people believe that it was really important to collect information about perhaps David's contact details, and some people thought that it was important to give David the option whether information is collected or not. Some people had the view that there was a need to explain the benefit to David if his information is collected, such as he won't have to tell his story again if he comes back, or the peer workers can keep in contact with him. And some people believe that this should be seen as a service offered to guests, such as information gathering, not something mandatory that poses a barrier to guests. So this key issue around information gathering was a key issue of discussion within the co-design session, and there was discussion around whether this is a requirement or something that should be offered to guests as something that benefits them. People in the session felt strongly that people's information shouldn't be expected to be taken and entered into an existing system that would be accessible to other services, and guests should be able to provide the consent about whether information is captured. There was also the view raised that it's important to be able to record that the service is being used and how it's helping people for the purpose of continuing improvement and to evaluate the service. However, it was noted that it doesn't necessarily require people to provide their personal details, so it could be de-identified information, and this should be done in the least burdensome way as possible. Finally, there was also a view that this information should be used for the right reasons, such as preventing suicide rates in the region, rather than for giving the service just a pat on the back. So there was a couple of things that came out from that scenario with David. Okay, so to sum up the last kind of parts of the combined co-design session, we asked people what their nominated non-negotiable for opening a safe haven would be, and I'll take you through some of the lists there. Again, there was a strong view that communication and compassion for the carer was needed, and not forgetting those who are at risk of suicide. Some people said a willingness to challenge culture, to remove barriers. There was talk around the resilience and willingness of peer workers to help others. Some people thought that the safe space should be an accessible space, non-judgmental and welcoming. Some people said simply that they wanted people to be supported. There was a strong view as well that they wanted the service to get off the ground, and the service can learn as it grows and decisions can be made later. There was also a suggestion around non-discrimination and giving people whatever they need. Another non-negotiable was having an open mind and understanding all experiences are different. And finally, that trust was a key element of opening a safe space. So as Carrie said earlier, we had a larger list of the values for the safe space, and we consolidate those at the end of the session. So here we have the ones that we've come up with here. I can genuine empathy, humility, authenticity, non-judgmental, transparency, support, respect, and compassion. I'll hand back to you, Carrie.
Thanks, Bridget. So we just wanted to summarise at the end of this presentation the key issues that have emerged that are quite often. We get a lot of common key issues you can imagine across all of the LHDs, but there are ones that emerged as very significant to this local area, and they're particularly ones where people had sometimes strong divergent views, and these will require further exploration and communication from and by the LHD. So these are gathering information from people who access the safe haven. What does that look like? What are the current hard boundaries around that? So that is a bit of a movable feast, what's being required by the ministry. So that definitely requires ongoing kind of communication by the LHD about what is possible. Also, as you've seen today, how a no wrong door approach can be applied consistently, but how does it sit in tension with some of the things that that people think mean that people wouldn't be a good fit for the space. The presence of security guards, again, I've said, in a trauma-informed service environment, how are those things reconciled if they need to be? And again, the involvement and connection with clinical staff, that needs further investigation and if necessary, some sort of resolution. Thanks, Bridget. And then in terms of next steps, so this is the final webinar. The feedback survey, as I said, will open now. It will be closing on the 22nd of February. So there's the link there, the Survey Monkey. It'll be on the Rose's website on the landing page of this LHD as well. There'll be a final collation of all the co-design outputs once the survey outputs are collated, and that'll be shared with participants, and then all of that information gets collated and sort of thematized and summarized in a report by Beacon Strategies, who've been working tirelessly behind the scenes, sometimes out in front. Elliot was with us last week to make sense of all of this information and to hand over to the LHD a draft service model, specification document. There is a guardianship role that Roses plays to support the transfer of the service model to actual service delivery. What that looks like is still to be determined. And then there'll be a redesign. So co-design is fundamentally an iterative process, meaning that it continues for the life of the service. And so there'll be a redesign workshop 3 to 6 months after opening. And importantly, it doesn't just involve the original co-design participants, but also guests who've utilised the service, who can bring their own expertise by experience to the process of continually improving this service model. I just like to, I know there are a couple of questions, so I think I just like to say the thank yous first. We just want to specifically thank Ben Miller, who's the project manager of the whole suite of Towards Zero Suicides initiatives in Southwest Sydney LHD. As you can imagine, that's an enormous job by anyone's measure, but on top of that, behind the scenes, he's worked really tirelessly to try and facilitate the best process here, so it's very much appreciated. A massive, massive thank you to all the lived experience and health professional participants who really put so much time and energy, and we really saw the passion in the co-design processes and to respond to the feedback loops. We really, really appreciate how much richer the process is when people do, commit to it the way people have, and it's been really invaluable. Just a final reminder to spread the word about the survey. It's the last opportunity for broader community input, for people to have their final say, some suggestions. We know that we can't have everyone in the room. There's always missing voices. So please tap into your informal networks to spread the word about this process and to communicate these outputs to people. It's a community based initiative. It's really important to get that collective buy-in to the service, to these new kinds of services. Bridget, I'm not sure if you wanted to read out those questions. Are there, just before we go, I think there are a couple.
Yeah, I'm back.
Okay.
Okay, I have one question here, or a comment regarding the flags, so not having them too big. So I think that's the flags at the front. Another question, I assume that the SPOT Suicide Prevention Outreach Team is a service that will run as a complementary service, but what is it specifically and how will it work?
So SPOT stands for, I think acronyms get thrown around a lot. So just for people that aren't aware, SPOT stands for Suicide Prevention Outreach Team. So there are those, what in traditional language is called an assertive response to people in suicidal crisis. It'll be a team of two, so a clinician working with, in partnership with a peer worker, going out to people in their homes, generally it will be, but out into community to respond to crisis immediately. So in terms of the relationship between the SPOT services and the safe havens or the safe space services, that how that will actually look in practice is really up to each LHD, and so we can't speak on behalf of the LHD there, and I imagine it's something still being worked out. So Bridget, did you have anything more to add around how people could get that information? Or
yeah, no, Carrie. Oh, I'm echoing. Yeah, no, I think you're correct. I think there's more work to be done there, and more will be found out soon. Yeah.
Okay. I realise we've gone for 40 minutes or more, so we appreciate people that have actually participated in this live, and anyone that's watching the recording. As we said, we encourage you to take your time to look through, dig into the information here, and of course to complete the survey and get others to do that. I just want to say that it's been really fantastic to be a little bit of a part of this process in this LHD in Southwest Sydney. It's super important. We know how much these services are needed, and so thank you again to everyone that's contributed to the process.
Yeah, thanks, Carrie. It's been a pleasure, and I'll reiterate as well that the survey will come to you from me in an email too, so we have lots of ways to access it and to share it widely. So thank you, appreciate it.
Thanks everyone.
Take care.
Yeah.